Hey, welcome to the Doc Analyzes Anything, the show where psychology and science meet and we attempt to explain any and every behavior, including saying love you before hanging up on a work Zoom call.
The struggle is real. Like I have to
I've done it.
I have not, but I'm like very careful. Like, nope, don't. This is still work. Don't be too friendly saying goodbye to people.
I've been seeing this trend about people calling their bosses to say goodnight. I don't have a boss, but I've wanted to try it.
Like
so
people
if
do
either
it
of
on
you get a
purpose,
random
or?
call from me, just know that I think highly of you.
It seems like something that's probably happened in the past at some point. Like your Chad's just got sentimental at one point and just texted or called.
I just wanted to say goodnight. Wish you happy dreams.
I do the classic like you too when somebody says like what's up or something, but I don't call it out or anything. I just like double down.
Just get real close to their face. I said you too.
You need to respond.
Say something. It's awkward now.
How
Oh,
are you guys?
yeah. Kids have been sick, so there's a lot of fun there.
We had that too. It's the season for it. As school starts and then everybody coughs on each other.
Chad is still just locked in a dark room as usual in his little cave there.
Yeah, that's just the curtain. There's more to my room. You just can't see it, but
That's
things are
good.
good.
We can't see what's in your room. We don't want to know what's happening.
Yeah,
in that room.
you don't want to know what's behind me. So we had a really early morning event. So Amy's taking a nap, and I might lay down after this. But all in all, really, really good. Things are moving forward.
Yeah, Chad doesn't do anything before 9:30, 10 a.m. So it could have been like 8 a.m. That was a real early morning for him.
No, I had to be there at 7. It was terrible.
There's a lot of people that are gonna be like, that's not early, but that's okay.
I know.
I agree with you personally.
There's a lot of people by 7 o'clock. They've already gone for like a 5-mile run.
My kid's bus leaves at 6:30, and I'm lifting them out of bed because they're not moving. So
is that why you started doing homeschooling for some of the kids? You're like, no, just not doing this anymore. It's too early.
There were other reasons why we started doing homeschooling, but yeah, we are gluttons for pain and punishment. Early morning bus, and then schooling the other half of the children by ourselves.
I set my alarm for exactly an hour before the kids need to be leaving the house to go to preschool. So get up, get them ready. I get ready. We get fed, and then I can do that in an hour. It seems legit.
Yeah,
probably not really.
We're a photo finish every day, man. It's my son this morning was just face down on the floor, like falling asleep. And
so there's a future episode then, like, why do some people like to have more time in the morning, enjoy their morning, watch some TV, have a coffee? And I'm like, this is a waste of time. I want to sleep until I can just barely get out the door on time. I have no interest in having a long drawn out morning.
It is a very not to draw this out, but it is a very kind of adrenaline fueled morning where we're just like, if you miss the bus, like it's on you guys. And so everybody, tension's high, emotion is raw. And then once everybody's out the door, my wife and daughters sleep in. So I'm just alone. So I do like the New York Times crossword puzzle, and that takes me like 4 hours. So I just get up and, and go to work. So yeah.
I never liked having time to sit around as a kid, and I think it's probably because I was always too tired, and so I just start falling asleep again on the couch. So that's probably where that all came from. So
yeah.
All right, today we're going to go into a little bit of a more serious topic, just with what's going on in the world right now and current events. We thought we'd talk about political violence and kind of as a whole why the world just seems like such a horrible place kind of right now. We're not going to go into political topics individually, but kind of just talk about things in generalities. But before we dive into that, I am your host, Dr. Steven Sparks. With me, as always, is Kyle Sturry and Chad. We don't want to look behind the curtain. Hard tongues here with us again. Nobody wants to move that curtain. So just a couple disclaimers since this is going to be a little bit more serious, uh, if you've listened up to this point, I think I've made it pretty clear. I don't subscribe to any political party. I don't like the idea of the political party system. As far as I'm concerned, we should just get rid of the party system, have everybody put out what they believe in, and then we vote for whoever matches up with what we believe in the closest. And so there'll be a little bit of that discussion, not in terms of which party does what or who I disagree with most, but just the fact that the party system as a whole kind of breeds dishonesty and, in certain cases, corruption, because it's all about trying to stay in power, and kind of how that can lead to some of the political violence we've seen kind of on the uptick recently. And so, um, to be fully transparent, I was not familiar with the name Charlie Kirk prior to his murder. I try not to listen to people out there talking about their views on politics, because I know what I think is right and wrong, good and bad, and what I would vote for. And so I'm not, I'm interested in seeing what other people may or may not be, listening to see where their views may stand. But I'm not interested in someone trying to come in and convince me of something I don't believe in. Uh, but regardless of whether or not I believe with what someone says, I would never suggest, and I don't think any of us would ever suggest or advocate for violence in any way, shape, or form. And beyond it just not being good for society, not being good, a good practice, and potentially tearing down the fabric of how our society is supposed to work, there's a lot to suggest that, it could have a negative impact that you don't foresee as well. And so I was going to start by giving an extreme example of why it's never a good idea to turn to violence, even if you think this will solve an issue. And that is, the most extreme example I can think of was with Adolf Hitler, talking about, during World War II. If you talk to most people, they'd say, oh yeah, if we could have just gone in there and assassinated him, this wouldn't have happened. It would have been over. But by the time it was really brought to light what was going on, everybody was aware of the atrocities occurring. He was already spiraling. He was already tearing apart his own party from the inside. And a lot of historians suggest that had he been assassinated at that point, someone who was more put together and could have become even more powerful may have taken his stead, and it could have prolonged things or even had a different outcome in the war. And so I think the big message is, one, let's just not be jerks and hurt each other for the sake of hurting each other. The whole point of our political system is to not vote for people or vote out things we disagree with. But also, you never know that butterfly effect of what you might do and how that could negatively affect the rest of history, even though you think you're doing the right thing. It's at the time, I don't think anybody would have thought twice about, taking on who everybody thought of as the worst person in the world at that moment. But it could have really turned things around and had a negative impact. So
Fair disclaimer.
it's a long disclaimer, but I think we need to be as clear as possible that we're not advocating for or against anything. In general, this is a scientific analysis of what's kind of going on in the world and what we see, So let's kind of talk about, majority of human history has been rife with violence. I mean, prior to going into living in larger groups, you had your tribes or whatever groups you may want to call. And we don't know 100% how this all worked. There's no recorded history, but we can see from other Aboriginal peoples and tribes how the hierarchy worked, how they warred with one another, how, whether it was a somewhat democratic process or through lineage or what have you, people came into power when others were no longer able to maintain power, how one group took over other groups. Either secession or violence was just the way it worked for much of human history until we started growing into larger societies. And I think that's probably when we really started coming with these ideas like, hey, theft and murder aren't good things, because you can't have that in a large society, or at least you can't accept that with a large society and have it succeed. It's going to happen individually, but for the most part, there probably wasn't even this thought of good or bad in terms of murder until we started growing into the uh, agricultural societies that allowed more people to live together. At that point, people took over either because they got more followers or, they said, hey, this God or that God has talked to me. They want me to lead you, so you all need to listen. And in general, people tend to latch on. It delivers more power to that person. And people don't usually have an issue following as long as they're being treated well and life is good. And so if things are going well, then you're going to have that normal succession. Usually it's a family member. Sometimes it's a close follower. Not too long ago, I was reading up on the entire history of the English monarchy just because I was wondering, where did it really start after the Roman Empire, that sort of thing. And there was a point where there was no succession in place. Nobody knew what to do. And they kind of just, all the different lords of all the lands in the area got together and like, yeah, this is who we're going to put in power. That seems like a good person, sort of thing. But whenever life's just not getting good, whether it's the leader's fault for being kind of a jerk and treating people not well, or if it's famine, drought, disease, whenever life just doesn't seem good, that's when someone tends to take the violent approach, whether it's warring armies or someone sneaking in and taking over. Although, through a lot of history, even family members would be like, hey, nope, I think I should be the king now and come in and, attack in the middle of the night, that sort of thing as well. So really what it seems to be coming down to is this idea like of modern politics, the current political arena has made it so we don't have this level of violence anymore. It's not the norm as it has been throughout most of human history. And so looking into why today is different than it was historically, and whether it's our values have changed or it's just that we've set up a system that makes it less necessary, is I think kind of the place to start. So, I mean,
So,
go
well,
ahead.
yeah, that's a lot to digest because you got a lot
Mhm.
going on there. Now, you did mention. So I had this is the first time that I've actually had a chance to like read through all the pre-show notes.
Well,
Obviously,
I
this
don't usually
topic
send
was
them to you because I want you to just react and then give you a hard
exactly,
time
yeah.
about
So
it.
I actually had an
Yeah.
opportunity to read through these, and you did say that in the notes. You said politicians purposely stir up fear and create calamity, and my curiosity around that is, so what does fear do to a person's decision-making ability, at least from a behavioral perspective?
It and this is, mostly viewing society as a whole because it can do a lot of things. We're talking behavioral analytically, getting some real scientific with it. It can create the motivating operations, like we talked before. So it can increase the reinforcing value of certain behavior or certain outcomes. It can motivate you to behave in certain ways. It can show that, hey, here is this opportunity for reinforcement to agree or disagree with this person. Like I always refer to the talking heads, the people out there. They're not necessarily being right, they're just being loud, and that tends to be who people listen to. And even if you disagree with someone for, well, most of your life, if you listen to them enough, and it's almost like when you tell a story and embellish and it becomes more and more real to you over time, they'll start making more and more sense the more you listen to somebody as well. And so and sometimes it creates fear for you to act. Sometimes it creates fear that doesn't allow you to act. And sometimes it's going to actually start shaping and changing your views on things in ways that you wouldn't expect to. And so I think if we talk to anybody without, any political party alliance involvement, discussion whatsoever, it's just about their views. Most people would agree with freedom, dignity, treating people well, letting people be who they want to be as long as they're not hurting someone else, that sort of thing. And it's not until you add in this political arena and someone says, hey, these people are dangerous, that they're potentially hurting us. And if you are convinced of that they create that fear, now you have a motivation against a person to maybe go against those values and not treat them the same way, or to continue to vote for people that are going to do that sort of thing. And well, let's be perfectly clear too. We're not saying that anybody in any side of the aisle is doing this necessarily purposefully. They might be. It's hard to tell. They may be out here stirring up fear just because they know people will vote for them if they can't solve some of these issues that people really want solved, but hey, I've created this fear and now I'm going to solve that issue. And it could be purposeful, but it could be that it's been reinforced to create this fear because they continue to stay in power, and therefore now their entire rhetoric is creating more and more fear, and so I think you can't say globally what it does except to create an aversive condition where people are more likely to act, and more likely to act potentially in either dangerous ways or ways that they wouldn't have acted before.
I think there's something to be said too about speaking of fear. And Chad, you probably know more about this than I do, but just the role that social media plays, like in all of this political violence, upheaval, increases, and all that stuff. These companies are designed to keep us engaged in enragement. Enrage is a form of engagement that seems to work really well. People have figured out how to kind of manipulate that variable to keep us enraged and therefore engaged longer. And I think I'm sure there's studies, I'm sure there's people who can speak better about this than I can, but that high level of engagement in content that may or may not be factual, but nonetheless is feeding that rage and fear variable is therefore now influencing decision making as far as like what people do. Like they have that as their baseline, um, without a lot of accountability to a lot of the companies. I mean, I think like 2/3 of the top so many companies in the world right now are these people just pushing content without much oversight on what is actually being put out there.
I'd say even those that are having some oversight, like the FCC with news agencies and that sort of thing, whether they claim to be telling the news the way it is or saying it's satire, in general, sex and danger and fear sells. You know what I mean? Like they
Mhm.
are latching on to those stories that create fear because it is what sells. And it's hard to blame them for them because again, their behavior is shaped by this as well. We're getting higher ratings, so we're going to follow this down. And like we always say, you can't blame the rat if it's effective. If it's working for you, then you expect people to follow that pattern. But what they're also doing now is living or creating this world that we're living perpetually in negativity.
Mhm.
We just came through a pandemic where a lot of people died, so there's already the sorrow. There's already this idea that things aren't good. Everything we see everywhere is negative, and now we're even hearing again these talking heads or the politicians on every side talking about how horrible it is. Vote for us, we'll fix it because the world is this horrible place. And like we've
Mm.
talked about in several episodes lately, like maybe 10 years ago was a little better, but in general, this is one of the best times to be alive. Like life expectancy is up, except for like directly after the pandemic.
Human
Uh,
history wise.
yeah, human history wise, there's
Yeah.
less disease. Um, even though it doesn't seem that way, even equality is better than it has been, like even in modern history. Um, there's less famine out there. There's less war. If we could just, flip the script on this and change the rhetoric to one of positivity, people would see like, hey, we have some things to fix, but this really is not a bad time to be alive. But you have the media, politics, everything just telling us things are bad in order to either get clicks, views, or votes. And now it's hard to walk through your day without thinking, man, this world sucks. And so now everybody's kind of on this preface of like, you're right on that edge. At any time, one thing could set somebody off. And most of us will never be set off to that extent. But one more stressor with all this going on around us. And it's not hard to see how someone could make the decision, you know what, I have nothing left to live for, but I'm going to do something that's going to better society in my own view, even though, like we just talked about, it's probably not going to better society, and there's a good chance it's actually going to damage society in the long run. I mean, the entire framework of what we have going on as a society falls apart if this becomes a way to handle situations.
So this might be the answer to my question. But I'd like for you to elaborate on it. So my question is, why do people keep consuming fear-based content, even though, and when I say content, that's the media, that's social media, that's searching for something and training the algorithms to then feed you more of the same. But why do we continue to consume that, even though it makes us feel worse? And you mentioned Sex and Murder Cell, right? So then you're going to get, ad revenue if that's the platform you have, and negativity is addictive. But that's like really the shortened version of it. What more can you add to that besides sex sells? Negativity is addictive because those are the problem. Where's kind of our fix for that?
Well, I think you have to look at it as the individual person and what they're getting out of it. Um, if you're out there listening to something and you had certain views, and now the media is saying things that you're interpreting as agreeing with your views, even if they're negative, you're going to be like, yep, that's right. I'm going to keep listening to this. This is talking to me. If you disagree, you're going to keep listening because it's aggravating you. It's almost you're fighting the system, or fighting whatever it is you're hearing, even though there's nobody there as an audience to see it. Um, there's also the feeling like, poor me. Yeah, as weird as it sounds, being depressed, and in some instances, even anxiety can be reinforced through its effect on your behavior. And it's almost like you go down that rabbit hole. This will be something we have to deep dive into later, because it would be easily an episode all on itself. But my life is horrible and I'm a victim of it all, has a reinforcing value to it as well. Um, there's a lot of different things going on there, but I think more than anything, it perpetuates. You go down this rabbit hole and you become immersed in it, whether you're agreeing or disagreeing with what you're hearing. And now you emerge 2 hours later and like, oh, what did I just do? You know what I mean? Hearing more about what people are saying that you agree or disagree with, arguing with them, coming up with your own arguing points, finding other people to argue with. It all has reinforcing value. And the best that we could do, and we'll get more into this probably in a little bit, but if we turn it around and reinforce people saying positive things instead of the negative, and really key in on positivity, it could change the feeling of the culture as a whole without changing the message. You don't have to say, oh, everything's great. You can say, instead of saying this sucks, this is horrible, I hate this shouldn't be this way, you can talk about like, hey, this is how we can make this better. Just flipping it and turning around and talking about things in a positive manner, or what could be a positive manner, could have a much more effect on society as a whole. Just turning the discussion positive.
It sounds like a great call to action for individuals to take on their own. I think that is probably an impossible task to get the media to begin doing that, or what we now call, your social media influencers, basically individuals who have clout, to begin doing that as well. So when it comes to like your traditional media, which would be your TV, your radio, the ones that are regulated by FCC, right? Are we lacking accountability today that we used to have before? Because I kind of feel like when somebody would publish an article, they almost had to like find two sources to disprove it before they could legitimately make their statement. And right now, there's so much disapproval on things that people state. It's like they're not even looking if that is still the case. I feel like there's a lack of accountability from us, the society, to who we're looking to for our media or for our, information.
I'm pulling up the stat. I think, not to interrupt you, Steve, I think it's over half. Yeah, Pew Research, over half of US adults say they at least sometimes get their news from social media, up from the last few years. So the trend is increasing as people who sometimes get their their news from social media, which, as I talked about earlier, is kind of just a grab bag of whoever wants to
Well,
make stuff.
and that's why I talk about the talking heads, is like, I don't listen or consume influencer material much at all, because you never know who a person is, and most of the time they're probably just full of shit. Like there's no reason to know, like a reason for them to know what they plan to have or claim to have an expertise in. You know what I mean? I'm not out here talking fashion because I know I do not know how to be fashionable, except for these cool hats I designed.
We know.
But I'm a jean and t-shirts guy, and that's if you get me to put pants on at all. Otherwise, you never know. But comes to behavioral science, I mean, if you're interested in where I came from, how I learned this and that sort of thing, we can share that to show that I at least have some level of expertise compared to someone who is a fashion influencer, but then starts talking about human science. You know what I mean? Like if we could get people to know how to be skeptics and really look into, all right, does this person have any basis of knowledge to even discuss what that they're trying to discuss right now? That would go a long way. But that's much easier said than done. And so,
Sure. I mean, that
Mm.
to me, that almost feels like a core value. So something that is taught and ingrained from a early stage where like you grow up with this concept of I get information and then I challenge to myself on both sides. Does this
Mhm.
factually make sense? Does this resonate with what the general population is saying?
well,
And it feels like something that could be taught at a young age.
I think skepticism as a whole probably should be taught in schools, but now we're getting into a whole different arena where we said we weren't going to go because we are talking about politicians who have blatantly said, I'm winning the uneducated vote. You know what I mean? And so there is a theoretical push for people to be less informed because they are easily, I'm not going to use the word manipulated, but convinced of issues. And then if we could have a system where if you blatantly make something up, it's obviously not true, then you're disqualified from running for office. That would go a long way. Like if you're wrong, you make a mistake. Nope, we understand people make mistakes. But if you're blatantly just lying to people or making things sound different or worse than they are just to gain votes, and that disqualifies you, imagine the world we'd live in just from that. Like, nope, we just actually know what people are saying and they're going with, and like there is no misleading the public with what you say. Like if it was up to me, I'd say all the people running for politics, you put your policies online. People can go through, read what you say. They're there published. You can't even come back and say, nope, I never said that. And then be clear about like, yeah, maybe we won't be able to do this if everybody is against me and they disagree, but we're going to do our best because this is what we think will help the country. And if you got rid of the labels, if there were no Democrats versus Republicans or Green Party or anything like that, it's just like, here's these 10 or 15 people based on what they believe. You could even do a ranking system, like number 1 versus number 10, who I think I agree with the most to least. We find someone there in the middle. At least most likely they're not going to do something negative for the rest of society because they know they'll be held accountable with all of their views just here in front of you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you did say that most Americans agree on most issues if they're presented neutrally. Like,
Right.
obviously that's broad, and we're not going to take in the nuances in people's individual situations. But
Mm.
I think when you generally think of like societally what would be in the greater good, I think that's a pretty true statement that most of Americans are going to say, stopping at a stop sign is a good idea so that there's not people getting hurt for no good reason, and all the way up to the big issues.
Yeah. I was at a wedding one time, and of course there's alcohol involved, but someone who tends to have extremely different views than me was talking to me. We were introduced basically so we'd have this conversation, and they wanted to have the politics conversation. I'm like, no, I don't consider myself a Republican or Democrat, but like, here are my views. And they're like, well, yeah, I agree with all of that. I'm like, but why did we vote differently then? And they go, oh, because this is the party I vote for. You know what I mean? And that says a lot more than anything. I had someone just the other day like asked me like, "Are you liberal?" And I'm like, people would probably say I am, but I don't, think about that at all. I just think about here's what I think we should do as a country to make it a better place. And I think most people would fall in line with that as long as you're not putting labels on it. And they're like, I hadn't thought about that. That makes a lot of sense, And so really what I think it is, regardless of which side you tend to lean on, power, or as we may talk about more specifically, control over the populace is a generalized reinforcer. It is reinforcing because it gets those in power access to a huge variety of other reinforcers, whether it be money. I mean, you look at historically, it was like money, sex, whatever. I mean, you think about the harems in parts of the world, or the abuses that come out later on, even with our current politicians sometimes, or other people in leadership positions. This is just something that is reinforcing, and they may go into it thinking, hey, I want to do the right thing, I'm going to help people out. But as you become more powerful, your own needs become stronger. You start to even think like, oh, I know better than these people anyways, I'm more important, I'm maybe even better than they are. And so even though you may still have this idea like, no, I'm a good person, I do what's best for the rest of society, your behavior naturally moves towards your own reinforcers. And so this power, this control naturally corrupts. And that's why we need systems of checks and balances. Um, really, if we had a true democracy where the people all just voted freely for what they wanted, and there wasn't these political pressures and parties where you really only had two choices, that sort of thing, then we would be able to most of the time not have corruption for more than a couple years at a time. You just vote those people out, vote new people in it, and be off with it. But because it feels like there's only two options, and they purposely take up different sides of topics or different values just because now I can win over this crowd versus winning over this crowd. We're just tight roping down, trying to figure out, where do we fit, or we're not thinking of it at all because, hey, my family's always voted this way, so that's what I do too. It really is this two-party system, or our party system in general, that allows us to be hoodwinked in the way we are.
I think there's something to be said too, going back to like the skepticism discussion. I mean, skepticism is a healthy tenet of science. It's like a philosophical underpinning of natural science, which that alone is going to be a tough sell on a lot of people. Just as we think about different attitudes that would be good, like critical thinking skills. I think a lot of people say they're skeptical, but along with that comes like the attitude of like empiricism and this idea of taking into account all the evidence that you can gather, not just the evidence that reinforces your own bias, but the evidence that disproves the thing, like you were talking about, Chad. Like what disproves what I'm saying is fact. And I think some of that, earlier when we were saying, talking about reframing things to be positive, I think a lot of that, like the stuff that we could say could use work with like an empirical attitude, or even like just an attitude of taking into account like the idea of social validity, like what might be socially valid for me might not be for somebody else, taking into account other people's experience too. It's going to be really hard to make what's important to other people, but not necessarily me, just given my immediate surroundings and immediate situation. It's going to be a hard sell sometimes to get other people's issues that are really important at the forefront of things that like we think need to be improved on. Does that make sense? Like this idea of just even going back to like what's big in behavior analysis, like the idea of like compassionate care, like empathy is going to be, it's difficult when, if a politician comes around and say like, yeah, this might not benefit you per se, but it will benefit society as a whole. It's a hard sell, as opposed to, hey, I've created this fear, I've created a solution, and now I can win your vote because of the manufactured fear that I've created and the idea that I'm going to somehow fix it.
Yeah, I'll say as a society as a whole, we are failing the marshmallow test. And for those that don't know, it is basically, and this is usually done with children, but the study is, one marshmallow now versus two a little bit later, and will you maximize reinforcement like through that delay? That's the general quick gist of it. And so people tend to, if they even look at the facts at all, vote for what's going to help me now. Like, oh, I hear tax breaks, I'm going to have more money in my pocket. That's it. They don't analyze it any further than that and say, oh, this actually, by paying more money into taxes, could reduce my overall costs by this much, and now I'm actually saving money in the long run through this
Mhm.
program. You know what I mean? We don't do deep dives into things, and we don't know as a society who to trust for the most part. Some people, really dive deep into it and figure out, who's telling the truth or looking up the stats on their own and that sort of thing. But most people don't take the time, and we can't expect people to know who to trust. The people that they think they're supposed to be able to trust are the ones we're talking about right now, having ulterior motives just to do whatever they can to stay in power. You know what I mean? And so if one group's saying, no, don't listen to this news agency, don't listen to these influencers, don't listen to these people, and the other's saying the exact opposite, all you can do is bank on that group that you've always listened to telling you what's right, because otherwise you may not know where to go or where to find the truth. And the truth's always a little subjective anyways, because it depends on how it's presented and whether it really fits with history or science or what have you. But I don't think that we can expect people to know how to even begin looking into finding the right way to do things other than breaking down the system and making it simple. So hopefully people, it's at least hard for them to mislead you or lie to you.
Yeah, I mean, money in politics certainly doesn't help. Term limits don't help. There's, like you said, there's a lot of reinforcers for the politicians themselves that aren't necessarily in our best interest.
And even if they say they're going to try to push something through and they really mean it, or at least they mean they're going to try, a lot of times they know that Congress, everyone else is going to block it anyways. And so, look, I can follow through with my campaign promises, but I know that I don't actually have to worry about this being passed. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, in other cases, oh, we're gonna give you a tax break, but then you look deeper into the law and like, actually, in 3 years, your tax rates are gonna go up significantly. But hey, we told you the truth because the first 2 years are gonna be a little bit lower. You know what I mean? There are ways that people are going around doing things that they're not technically lying, but they're still misleading, and that's the sort of thing that it just doesn't seem like it should be acceptable to just lie to people when you're trying to fix the world or make it a better place rather than just try to stay in power.
Even if we just started with like investing in our road infrastructure so we didn't have construction season every single year and half the roads being shut down, I think it's a great start. But what's the motive for the politician who potentially might not be there in 2 years? They're going to ask you for a whole bunch of money and increases for something that they're going to attempt to do, but they may not be there to actually see it through. It takes somebody who like genuinely wants that societal fix regardless of their own position or power.
Yeah, I think that might mean that we should start looking for people that don't want to be politicians. They don't want to be in
Yeah.
power, but
No, just take the business owner, the Ace Hardware business owner. He's got some ideas. I guarantee you he's got some
well,
ideas.
if you go back to the beginning of American society, supposedly George Washington did not want to be president, but he knew that he had this view and that he could get people on all sides of the issues at least to work together enough to follow through with this view of what our country should look like. And so he accepted it even though he didn't want to be. And like, you can't go back in time or find that person because they could easily be lying about not wanting to be in power, but you'd be in a lot better position to finding someone that has good ideas that you're like, all right, well, they at least say they don't want to just control everything and go from there. But let's get back onto the violent side of things and where that comes from, because keep getting a little distracted there. Although we're kind of on topic talking about this weaponizing of fear and getting people using that to get votes and get support. Like we said, come through this pandemic, you've lost friends and family, you've been locked down. The world just seems like a negative place. All this negativity around you, and you start seeing these figureheads, these people up on stages or on platforms saying things that you disagree with. And if you feel like you're at a loss, that there is no moving forward, you have nowhere else to go, nothing else to live for. If it was a situation where like, I hate what this person's saying, but as a whole, the world's a decent place and I want to be a part of it, you'd see a lot less of this right now. But it's this fight or flight response where you can't flee. You can't fight the person you really want to fight, but you can try making some crazy out there extravagant attempt. And whether you see yourself as a martyr or you're delusional enough to think, nope, I'm actually going to make it through this and nobody will know it and I'll be okay. Obviously not ever advisable, but the mental health in our country has just diminished so much that you can almost see that thought process that someone might go through. You know what I mean? The negativity has a lot to do with that. But during the pandemic, working in the community mental health system, they were seeing people come in who had no history of mental health issues. And for those that aren't aware or familiar, most of the time, mental health diagnosis has to occur in early adulthood for that to really fit the diagnosis. Yet you have people in their 50s, 60s, 40s coming in who had no history of mental health issues, who now can't even function on their own because of the stresses of the environment around them. And it's easy to see, again, like how this can all like accumulate together, a cumulative effect to create something that someone would never have thought to do in their life up to this point.
So let me ask you a question. And this is just an idea that came to my head. Not idea. This is just a flighting thought. But so we have mandated reporting when it comes to in schools when it comes to abuse at home or things of that nature. Is it even plausible to have some sort of mandated reporting when it comes to mental health indicators within schools? I don't even know where I would go with that or how that would be established, but like maybe a particular training for those who are embedded in the schools to recognize specific signs or traits or characteristics that then could just be escalated to the next level to then figure out, is there potentially an issue here or something that could be nipped early on?
It's a very slippery slope. Like that sort of thing, if you are worried about someone enough, reporting to law enforcement often doesn't get to anywhere unless there's a law broken. It tends to be that they won't even take someone for involuntary, like for a night even at the hospital, unless they either have a plan to hurt themselves and the means to follow fulfill that, or that others can say, yep, no, they've been talking about their plans and they can follow through with this if they really want to. And it makes sense because you don't want people just going around having people committed just because they disagree with them or don't like them or think something's weird. And you can go back to Salem back in that what was it, 1500s, 1400s? I don't remember. I thought they was gonna come to me at the moment, but like all you had to do is say, I don't like that person. They're a witch. You know what I mean? There's a push to make it harder.
Goody Sparks.
Yeah. I think those are your people, right, Kyle?
Very, very related. Yes.
Yeah. But there's this push to make it harder to do that because of people's individual rights that have been violated through our mental health system in the past.
Yeah.
For a long time, you just were put in a hospital and left there, sort of thing. And so it's actually getting harder. But if you talk about the means to follow it out, you have this person who is definitely going through a mental health crisis of some way, shape, or form. They've been making statements. You're like, oh, this isn't safe. And they have access to a weapon or something. That would be a time then with the red flag laws they're trying to push, or even looking at the laws in Canada, where if you're going to buy a weapon, you have to do like multiple background checks to get basically witness statements saying that you're safe to have that weapon, that sort of thing. And I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting, or anybody on here is suggesting that firearms are the cause of any of this. And we'll get into this in just a second. But just that there are a lot of people that we see on a regular basis, and a lot of people out there that are in crisis that you certainly would not want to have access to a weapon in that moment. You know what I mean? It's due to their propensity to act in a violent way at this moment because of what they are experiencing. I think most of society would say, yep, let's just, remove that from them until they're in a better place, and then they can have that right back to them.
I see just so many reactive things being put in place, and I'm always trying to
Mhm.
see, is there potentially a proactive effort? And I get it. Mental health is a slippery slope, as you put it. There's a lot to it.
Well, and let's talk about the gun issue again, because it is one of the factors that comes up a lot. I think there's one side that's always saying, nope, this is just being used to try to take away our Second Amendment right. And a lot of people on the other side are like, no, but why do these people have access to guns when they're a potential danger? And so looking at the work we do, we have people with a mental health diagnosis. We are trying to help change their behavior to be more pro-social in order to help them, gain access to society. So you have someone who has a history of, could be murder, could it just be assault, whatever it is that they are not safe to be in society. If we just put them somewhere and throw away the key, they're not going to have access to society to behave that way again. On paper, it looks like, yep, you've cured the situation, you fixed it. But we know as behavior analysts, as soon as they're back in that situation again, those natural contingencies, the natural environment is going to have its effect, and they're very likely to behave that way again. So with firearms or any weapon, really, if you think about it in the same way, if we take away the gun, sure, they're unable to use it violently in that moment. But that does not mean that if they have access again sometime in the future, that propensity may not come back. So instead, let's work on pro-social behaviors, handling stressful situations, work on the skills that they could use to prevent themselves from becoming violent in the future. At which point the gun is no longer an issue whatsoever. It only matters that this person no longer has this propensity to be violent. And so it doesn't matter if we allow them to have it or not, you know? And there is a lot of people that would say, well, look at some of the European countries. I think Australia as well, where they made it very hard or illegal to have most firearms. And there was a decrease in gun violence. And maybe that is true. And maybe that would be universal. But without scientific studies, all we could say for sure is that it would prevent the legal use of firearms. But you look at what happened with prohibition, it may just be that American society is so ingrained in the Second Amendment right and the use of firearms that people just find a way around it regardless, and it wouldn't be effective. But regardless, we know that it would be effective to help people gain these skills and to not react violently in situations they find uncomfortable or aversive.
You're right. Like taking the weapon away isn't fixing the rest of the variables in place. Like it's not fixing the anger, rage, or even helping the mental health of the individual. It's just making it just yeah. It's more likely to come out in some other way at that point than with a weapon if the weapon's taken away. Yeah, if going off of what you were saying, like those restrictions that we put in place very oftentimes after 6 months of like mastery criteria, this person hasn't engaged in, their target behavior for 6 months, and we're supposed to have a discussion about taking away that restriction from that person who might live in a group home or something like that. Like, yeah, it hasn't occurred, but that there was no opportunity for that to occur anyways because of the restriction. So has the person actually demonstrated that they can behave appropriately versus where they were in baseline, or have we just made it impossible for that behavior to occur?
Yeah, I'll give a specific yet general example so I don't get in trouble for giving away someone's private information. But I had one person who was not allowed in the community because of danger to themselves and others, but only really engage in that if they could get to certain areas. And so they were moved quite a distance away from those areas. Um, and every month they'd gain a half hour of access to the community based on the non-occurrence of target behavior. And we weren't allowed to say anything about how successful we've been in working on teaching alternative, like appropriate behavior to replace the inappropriate behavior. It was all we were allowed to do was say this restriction is just based on the non-occurrence, based on, again, not setting someone up for failure is really what the system's thinking. They're like, hey, you're going to keep this person locked down forever if they just don't agree to work with you on these behavior plans. So this person would just wait 6 months until they could be gone for 4 hours at a time, find a way back to that area, disappear for weeks at a time, and engage in those same behaviors again, just because we weren't allowed to make it contingent on, actual success in our program, but just that non-occurrence. The same way, if you say, hey, don't use your gun inappropriately for a period of time, and then we let you have it back again, it's going to occur again. Or, hey, we've taken away guns, but you come across someone that's getting rid of one on the black market, and you find having a gun reinforcing, now that behavior is likely to come about again. And so we're not saying that gun laws wouldn't be effective. We just don't have enough information to suggest that they definitely would be. But again, actually teaching people how to handle their strife, their um, moments of being in this state where they may act violently would most certainly work, because we can test that, we can practice that, we can show its effectiveness.
And there's two ends of that too. There's teaching people to, de-escalate, self-manage, or whatever you want to call it. There's also, and that would be like a proactive, there's also like a preventative way of making the situation less in antecedent manipulation, like putting your phone away for, a couple hours a day and saying, I'm not going to read these headlines that are trying to grab my attention, or, doing something that historically has been associated with calm, or, some sort of happy feelings or something like that, like doing things that better yourself. I mean, a big intervention of just making the news less reinforced by viewership and more reinforced by telling factual, objective, stories,
Yeah.
things like that.
Well, I was going to get back to that again because we mentioned earlier, and then the topic was changed. But you talk about what has changed in the media, and we think back, at least in theory, we know we talked about before how there's always been this sensationalism, and people have always gone to executions and things like that. So there always is this interest in the macabre. But you think back of what your idea of the news was from like the 50s, 60s, 70s, what have you, or what was allowed on TV in general. And it was more censored because they thought it would offend people's sensibilities. And it wasn't until they started realizing, nope, this stuff sells, that now it became sensationalized more. And so if people do decide to just start encountering the positive more than the negative, make that decision today. I'm going to go find, every time I have a negative thought, I'm going to try to think of 3 positive things, or I'm going to go try to find a happy story every time I see something negative. That alone would start shaping and changing the way the media interacts with us, because they'd start seeing, oh, the positive things sell as well. And that is the sort of thing that it sounds too good to be true, a little cheesy, a little too easy, but something as simple as every time you find yourself going down the hole negatively, finding something positive to think about, talk about, what have you, can go a real long way of shaping your internal thoughts through your external verbal behavior and what you're consuming as well. And that's one that we'll get into in another episode, because that's probably an hour or two long conversation on how that works scientifically on its own. But in general, your overt behavior over time will shape your internal thoughts, processes, feelings, that sort of thing as well. And so if you spend more time engaging in positivity, then that will make you a happier, more positive person in general.
There's a setting on iPhone called assistive access, which basically turns your smartphone into a dumb phone. And that is something I've been considering, just so that I'm not, I don't have access to all the stuff that gives me access to all the negative stuff. So if I want to hop on social media, I have to go to the big screen to do it. Like, I've been jokingly saying I want to go back to a flip phone for years. I've been saying that. But this assistive access may give me like the tiptoe toe in the water version of that.
It's really hard. It's a double-edged sword. Like there's a lot of information, a lot of revelation, I think, from having more information that, like my worldview has changed. I don't know if it's for the better or worse, but I at least know more than I would without one. but I'm also up later at night and I worry more. There's a lot of negative outcomes too.
Yeah, I think on a daily basis, I'm tiptoeing this like, where are we in the world? This place is horrible versus like, I know this isn't actually how bad it is. And I'm going to consciously try to avoid these conversations because I know that people are kind of just talking out their ass half the time. You know what I mean? Like, it really isn't that bad right now. We need have things that we need to do and plan for the future to prevent it from getting worse. But I just always come back to like, most of these people out here talking have no idea what they're talking about. So why would I even want to consume that or listen to it? Um, and to get back to Chad's comment, I want to go back to a flip phone because I was, as weird as it sounds, much more proficient in T9 Word than I am in typing on a touch
Didn't
screen.
have to look at it.
No.
Those were the days.
Yeah.
So you can also take your screen. I mean, this is just like the tip. If somebody was like, how do I consume less on my phone, but still be able to have access to the stuff I need? Like, I still need my email. I still need my text. Still got to call my parents. You can also make your screen monochrome so that like all of the bright colors are no longer part of it. So if you do hop on Facebook, nothing is color. So you're not like constantly stimulated by all the stuff coming through. It just becomes just information.
It'd be less salient because if someone's trying to make a big point and draw you in, they're going to make it more colorful. And so if everything looks the same, you're going to consume it all the same. I mean, look at how people react to just capitalization nowadays. Like, why are you yelling at me? I'm like, I did not know I was yelling at you. I just touched this button. I'm sorry.
I tried monochrome for a week. I tried it for 1 week. I couldn't make it through the week because I was so bored with my phone that it was, and my screen time went down to like 2 hours for the day, where normally I'm like somewhere around like 5.5. So my screen time got reduced by more than half. But I was also like addicted. I was like craving to get back to my norm.
That's because the built-in reinforcers are going to be there regardless. And that's why, again, you have to find alternative sources of reinforcement or something that can actually compete with that. And that kind of brings us back full circle again, is
you're welcome.
If you want people to, not do the things that are potentially reinforcing but negative, then you have to find something just as reinforcing based in the positive, to draw them in. It really is like a scale, and you have people living in this negative world, like I said, the precipice. Why am I trying to say that word?
Precipice?
I don't know. It's funny.
I'm saying too many P's. I try to have 3 P's in there. So they're on the precipice of potentially acting negatively. And we've talked about before, we don't have to get into it too deeply again, but aversive situations create motivation for aggression. Just like you stub your toe, yell at the dog. We're all collectively sitting here with a stubbed toe, just waiting for someone to yell at. And if someone yells back, that might push us over the edge. And so if you can, find competing contingencies, like, all right, there's this level of reinforcement of fighting with this random stranger online that's just going to get me more riled up and thinking more negatively. But here's this other thing I could do that would be just as fulfilling, and I should just know I'm not going to change this fool's mind anyways. Then, that would be one way to address this as well. Is it's like a scale. What's more reinforcing? What's more probable? What is the more sizable outcome? It's teetering all the time. And if you can ever put anything on the side towards positivity, then you're going to engage in that behavior much more frequently anyways. We won't get into it too much, but I actually have an idea for a potential app maybe someday that we can help people through this as well.
I'm still giggling about precipice. There's this video of this girl who can't say due diligence. And that's what it reminded me of. She goes to her husband and sees her boyfriend or whatever, due diligence.
I do this every time where like, I know I can say this word 90% of the time, and then I'm just going to get stuck on it right here during this every week.
I literally had to laugh out loud though. Otherwise I would have just been smirking for the last couple of minutes here. So I had to just get it out of my system.
You're good. You're good. So yeah, I think it's just this idea that, we're all just ready to become violent because we're all living in these aversive conditions that are not only man-made, but socially made, not necessarily even that real. You have people of certain groups that are now, going through even more because of the rhetoric out there. And so they may be more likely to act, and it's not because of who they are, and it shouldn't be weaponized against the group as a whole if someone does act. Instead, we should be looking at, okay, why is it that their world had become so aversive and that we were basically excluding them from society to the point where they didn't feel like they had anything to live for anymore and they might as well act. You know what I mean? And again, this is all sides, both sides, not just one group or another, but we do see this in a lot of places, and it can't be anything but a sacrifice unless someone is delusional enough to think that they're Rambo or something, and then the world's going to throw them a parade when they're done or something, which never has ever happened outside of the movies,
We do live in a time with algorithm driven data, which essentially just breaks down to be like before, if you sat in front of the TV, you got what you got. And you probably had your own arguments, you had your own thoughts, you tuned into the station that you liked for the most part, but your entire day wasn't consumed around the algorithm. Where now because we have our smartphones, we are able to search just about anything. But then all these platforms then are going to perpetuate my point of view and then feed me more of my point of view to reinforce me, which is kind of like a celebration, regardless of how wrong I might be, or maybe wrong is the wrong word in your industry, but no matter how wrong I am, I'm still going to continue to get fed that same, no, Chad, you're actually right. It could be anything from shopping for red shirts that look terrible on me. Well, it's going to keep feeding me red shirts, all the way down to, firearms, or how to make this, or how to do this, or what does this mean? And then now it's learning and learning and learning, and now it's feeding me stuff I wasn't even thinking before. Like
And
we're like forced into tunnel vision from just that initial search of exploring our worldview, and our worldview almost gets built for us.
Yeah.
I mean, and look, society isn't having time to evolve with the changes either. It's taking time, and that's part of the issue as well. Is we need to learn how to evolve as a culture and figure out how to handle these things. Because, I mean, as a young child, we didn't even have cable. Like, it was available, but we didn't. And after, like, I don't know, 1 a.m., the TV just turned off. Like, there was nothing on.
Yeah.
You had some infomercials or nothing at all on these channels, and we're just talking the 90s at this point, or maybe even the early 2000s. And so from that to this all day, every day, something's constantly going on. You can basically live your life, if you didn't have to sleep, just constantly consuming things and not knowing how to navigate what is actually true, or what is right, or what is good. it it really is just shaping behavior randomly at times. You know what I mean? And even going to the Facebook algorithms, when we all started on Facebook, when it first went on, like, you just saw stuff in line. Like, the last time someone put something on, that's what you saw. And I still much preferred that. It was much more reinforcing to look and see people I knew, and I wanted to see what they were up to and see what they had, like, talking about. And now, through the principle of intermittent reinforcement,
Yeah.
it's rare that you actually find something of substance that you're actually interested in or care about. But instead of making us look at social media less, it actually makes us look at it more, because you have to now go through 20 or 30 different things just to find that one piece of reinforcing, material. And so they're using our principles against us here, and getting people addicted and looking and consuming things that they never even cared about, wouldn't have been something they were interested in seeing in the first place, but they have to get through that to see the thing that they might be interested in. And so
most of those companies are very familiar with Skinner, very familiar with behavioral principles.
yeah. And so, I mean, it's interesting how they can take a product, make it less reinforcing on the whole, yet make it control behavior even more, and take more of your time up, cycling through it.
Addiction.
It's a really interesting point you said, how society is not evolving as quickly, keeping up with the evolution of technology. And so, like, things are happening faster than what societal society is actually ready for, not even capable of really handling in its true form, which is kind of scary because I think that technology is an upward curve. It's not just a linear, and so like it's continually growing at a perpetual rate, not at a steady rate. And so what was 2 years ago would today probably evolve in like 3 to 6 months. And so we really don't know where we're going to be in just as little as 1 year from now.
Yeah, I will say you get stories here and there of younger generations deciding to disconnect and not download those apps and not participate in some of these things. And I think a lot of times they're actually finding other things to consume. And it's not necessarily that they're getting less of the social media or random influencers that may or may not actually have something of substance to say. But at least there's this idea that they're removing themselves at some point, and maybe we are evolving and society as a whole is just deciding that this isn't how we're going to spend our time over time, or we at least hope so, that it is starting to decrease from the younger generations just because it can be such a detrimental place for society as a whole to kind of live your life and spend your time, you know?
We definitely don't know the reason why they're doing it though.
No, it is 100%. We just, all you can do is analyze the data and make some inferences, but it does not mean that it's not something actually sinister rather than hopeful. But
I don't know. These kids nowadays speak in a language I can't even understand.
Don't
we were
even
just as bad. We were just as bad, I'm sure.
We were worse. I mean, the things that we said and talked about and stuff, it's like, it still doesn't make sense how we talked, but there we did it. So it's all right.
Yeah, it's all right.
I was at a store the other day hearing a mom of a teenager trying to talk like the teenager, and I was shuddering for the teenager. I felt like quite bad for that child to have to listen to their mom using that language. All right. So before we kind of wrap things up, any other thoughts, questions on any of this? I mean, it really just does, I think, come down to this feeling that everything's horrible. So what's the point when it's not so horrible really at all?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good take. I think your points about, living under aversive conditions and therefore aggression becomes more likely is a good scientific take. I think it's important that while things is important to see the good, it's also important to see that it's not necessarily good for everybody. But being empathetic in that take is, I think, the solution to that. Like, there's that consideration that I might be wrong about some things, I think is a really important, not only scientific take, but just like from a humanistic side of things too.
Yeah. You can't just be blind to the world completely, but also, minimize how much time you spend in that negative area.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's really is. I mean, if I hear something or look something up and it's because of all the years I spent in grad school and being crammed down my throat, like, you don't make a statement unless you can back it up with data or a study of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I see something, I'm like, is that true? Like, I'm looking at 10 different sources trying to figure it out. I'm not taking society to do. So you have to stay aware and try to be aware of where people are suffering so you can try to help them out, assuming that you want to be that type of person. But you also aren't doing yourself or them any favors by just living in that arena of negativity. Like,
Right.
if you're
right.
suffering, you're not helping someone else, and it's interesting too, because the rhetoric, the negativity, the fear mongering by those in power to stay in power, in the case that we're talking about right now, and again, we're not talking about any individual instance, but just political violence as a whole, is literally putting themselves in the crosshairs. Like, they're putting themselves in this dangerous situation. And throughout human history, it's been that way as well. If you went to try to fight to become king, most likely someone was trying to, take your position violently at some point as well. But it'd be so much easier, at least, all right, so much safer, maybe not easier to convince people, but safer to just take the positive route get rid of the ability to mislead and lie and say, hey, this is what I want to do. If you agree with me, vote for me and be done with it. It would certainly seemingly make the world a better place if we could do that. So I think on that note, we'll tie it in here. I'm not going to do my normally, I think, funny, probably nobody else does, ending of, calamity. And let's just keep it at like, find ways to enjoy life. Try to look to the positive. It's not that bad out there. In fact, it's probably one of the easiest times to be alive, even though there's a lot of negativity going around too. And so just try to immerse yourself in the positive, and that way you can be there and present and able to take on the negative and fight for what you think is right when you're ready and able to.